Hi, this is Jim from Crazy P.
And I'm Chris.
We're with Computer Music today in our studio in Nottingham, talking about the conception of our track Step Into the Light.
So this is our track Step Into the Light. And we were talking about this the other day about how it is conceived, and
the memory is hazy.
The memory is hazy. But I think
when we were working on the album, we had a host of material, some of which needed to be worked up, some of which was more completed. I think at one stage I got a little bit worried we didn't have enough material to be working with. So I went through some old folders, which is always a good move, and I found an idea that we'd done and forgotten about. And it was effectively the vocal from Step Into the Light, but with a really different backing. And it was the vocal really that attracted me to digging it out. And I think I had an evening session on it where I just I pulled the vocal out and just tried working a different angle. I think the original was quite sort of techie, wasn't it? Sort of techie and bleepy from my recollection.
Yeah, I think it was a jam we had. The original was quite different, but a lot of the kind of sort of quirky bleepy noises, I think, kind of came into this.
Did we have an idea on the Vermona though? Was that what we were saying?
Yeah,
yesterday?
I think so. Yeah,
a pattern on the Vermona, which I think we really liked, but we kind of moved away from. I think when I heard the vocal, it sparked something quite different, because Danielle's lyrics and vocals generally are sort of from the heart, and the lyrics here were a little bit different, a little bit more poetic and a little bit more surreal. So I really got on top of that, and I think I worked up the drum programming and got the basic feel, and then we had a session on it together.
Yeah. I think there was definitely a few versions kicking around.
There always is.
And I think there was bits that were taken from a session that I'd done, and bits and pieces from. It was a bit of an amalgamation of different kind of sessions that we individually worked on, because I think originally it was just a jam we'd done, and then we'd kind of gone away separately, done stuff, and
which we do a lot.
We do, and
working on your own, you can always waste time better.
Yeah, waste time better.
It's like you're not under pressure when we're both in. It's if you need to get an angle on something, it's a good way to kind of get an angle and then present it to each other.
Yeah.
And I think this was a case of that.
Yeah.
And then it was just sort of moving it from where it was into sort of embracing the more poppy angle that I think the vocal suggested, and incorporating some more unusual elements for us, like the horn section. And also, in terms of the form, what I loved about it was it wasn't a straight song form. In fact, the choruses in this are basically instrumental, and I love the fact that you kind of go 3 verses in and then you get a chorus popping right at the end. It wouldn't work every time, but I think it on this occasion it really does, because you have the horns taking the lead, putting the stamp on a melody in the chorus, and it kind of propels it along until you get to the final throws, which is the big layered up chorus. And that's another thing I loved about it. It was just a bit off kilter in terms of the form.
Yeah, this is definitely, it's not a straightforward verse chorus vibe, is it? And I think it sort of it took us a while to kind of settle. I think we tried to make it a bit more conventional at the start, and then realised it's all right. He doesn't need to. We don't need to kind of go down that route. It kind of worked as it was, and it ended up there was other incarnations where I think there was like a breakdown. We were going to have like you know,
Oh yeah, I've got
the
that.
step into the light sort of, but then have a big chord thing, and
Yeah.
but it ended up just kind of ending on the big chorus and having a little outro, and it was just like, oh, this is just really snappy and short and cool, and it's just kind of working. So
Just, I mean, generally speaking, we do tend to add a lot of stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of in our nature to kind of fill it out as much as we can, and this was a good example of us stripping it back. And also sort of using sort of other influences apart from disco and house, and just sort of, you've got such a character-driven vocal that it's... we really wanted the backing to reflect that and not to sound like a dance music tune necessarily. So I guess it's come out the other end with those pop sensibilities.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of I mentioned it before, but like, you know, the sledgehammer kind of brass, kind of slightly subconsciously or consciously.
Well, everyone loves sledgehammer.
Well, who doesn't? we saw that was kind of in the back of our minds.
I think that was a discussion point for a little bit, because that definitely sent us over the edge in terms of stylistically, in terms of being quite far away from what people might expect from us. And I think we had a few discussions like that during the album, where you just have to, you know, don't pare it down, just go for it. Just, try and, get it as effective as possible without worrying about where it fits in.
Yeah, I guess in terms of process, where it's, I mean, we both obviously, you know, within the band, we have our sort of specialist area. You know, Jim's keys, I'm guitar, but certainly when it comes to being in the studio, I don't think we're that precious about who does what.
No.
Anymore.
I mean, not in this particular case, because we had such a tight deadline on the record. The tour had been booked in, and any sort of creative problems that were awaiting completion had to get sorted. So I do remember the last sort of 2 or 3 months, there was a fair amount of baton passing between us whilst we worked out these bits.
Yeah.
So, I mean, roles-wise, it's. I think when we're together, Toddy will generally sit at the computer. I mean, not all the time, but
no,
really,
I mean, I think generally, I think the majority, it's, I think when you get to the nitty gritty sort of mixing or the back end stuff, I guess I'll probably do maybe a bit more of that. But I mean, that doesn't really take that much time. And when, generally speaking, in the studio, it's not one person sat at the controls.
It's whoever's on what.
It's whoever's on what. It's very, very, very even.
And in this particular case, who could come up with something that we could work with? You know, in this case, a framework which we could work on together. Yeah,
because we were, like Jim said, you know, the deadline was probably one of the hardest deadlines we've had to work towards, and it did. It gave us a shot in the arm, really. It was sometimes you need that. I mean, you always need a deadline, but I mean, there was
no going back on that one.
I mean, we were kind of, you know, mixing, you know, guitar solos or whatnot on the morning of the mastering. You know, it was that close. So but we're really, really pleased with the results, and I think it's actually benefited the sound, rather than lingering too much on details that probably aren't that important.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Chris to go through the track with you. I've got Brian Eno on hold, so I'll just go and speak to him.
So yeah, I'll start with a sort of overview of just how we kind of like to organise most of our tracks at the moment, especially for the latest album. So I tend to colour code everything the same. So at the top, this light blue colour is pretty much all the drum track, and then the purpley blue is sort of percussion, and then you've got the bass in brown, and any sort of kind of vintage keys like clavs or piano, Rhodes gets a green colour. Guitars in orange, and then sort of analog stuff is all red. Then sort of samples and effects tends to get a pink colour, and then vocals in this sort of browny yellow. I don't know why the new version of Logic doesn't have a yellow for some reason, but so all the vocals there. There's a sort of some backing vocals there in a slightly different colour, and then there's quite a lot of brass in this one, which I've given a kind of light green colour. So that it really helps just zone in, especially if you're using the same colours for using the same sort of colour scheme for most projects you're working on. You get so familiar with the colours that it really helps you navigate around the track. It's I mean they don't necessarily correspond to different buses, but in certain instances they do. I always bus the drums. I always bus the vocals. Sometimes the bass, but it's usually. I know lots of people will break down tracks into individual groups and bus them all. I just tend to do it on the drums and vocals, because those are the chunks that I kind of tend to be sort of tweaking the most and like to have grouped together. So as you'll see here, like underneath this big drum block here, this is the drum bus, which has a little bit of kind of treatment on the channel. But yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute, and maybe just start going through some of the drum tracks. So for this particular track, we used the drums were actually from, and I think Jim will be able to verify this. It was from, there was an app on the iPhone called Funkbox. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's really cool. It's got loads of like old vintage drum machines, and one of the drum machines it modelled was the Oberheim DMX. So we used the kick and the clap from that. So if I just sort of isolate, and the snare as well, obviously. So we sampled the drums off the app and then stuck it into the Logic ES24 sampler. Made a bit of a drum kit up so we could kind of obviously have a bit more playability with it, because programming off your iPhone is not the most ideal way of making drum tracks. So that formed the basis of the main body of the kit. Underneath the kick, we've got, this is something that we've been using quite a lot. It's called Big Kick. And I tend to just use it for the sub, to add sub to a kick drum, whether it's a sampled kick drum or, because we tend to use a lot of Lin kicks and Oberheim kicks and stuff, but they are lacking a little bit in sub and bottom end. So this is really good because you can really change the pitch and the way that the attack of the sub is shaped, the curve that it kind of dives down. If I can give you a bit of an example, what I'll do is I'll copy this over so that I can play around with it. Okay. So yeah, you've got a real nice control over where the picture actually starts, so you can tune it and really shape the envelope as well. And just have really nice control over making it sit with the kick that you're trying to beef up. So in this tune, it really just adds a nice bit of bottom end really, and fills it out. So we've got a clap as well, which is off the Oberheim funk box, and this is layered up with a sample, which just gives it a little bit more of kind of a flammy sort of feel to it, so it's not quite on the beat. So I think if you look at the waveform there, you can see that the sample is just coming in just before the actual Oberheim thing, which just gives it a real nice lazy kind of clap feel. What else is going on here? Crash pad. So this is quite nice. These these little electro harmonic boxes, which we got last year, which are brilliant. We've been using them on everything. So this this features quite heavily on this tune. It's got it just layers on top of the snare, and you can really sort of mess with the sort of attack and the sort of the resonance of it. So it's kind of like put in manually. So we just kind of just do a live take through the track, just changing messing with the start point and getting a really nice kind of moving part to the snare. So you can, in the mix, you can't really hear it that prominently, but because it's changing throughout the track, it's not static. It's a subtle thing, but it adds a nice little bit of movement. So that's kind of what the main drum track's made up of. So I'll just move on to the drum bus, which hasn't got an awful lot going on, but we started using, it's worth looking at this. This is a really nice plugin we started using, which is it's basically a modelled version of the filter and the analog to digital converter from the Akai S950, and we've just started using it. It's really good for drums and bass, or anything really you want to kind of dirty up and kind of give it that sort of. I mean, you can take the sample rate as low as you like, but on this particular one, we've basically stuck all the drums through it. So if I take it off, it's pretty subtle, but it just adds a bit of grit. I mean, you can take this sort of as low, really get the sample rate down so it's sort of quite lo-fi, but I mean, you lose a bit of top end, so it's up to you can add it back. I mean, I tend to put some EQ back on it again just to kind of brighten it up, but it's a really nice little bit of kit, that, and we've been using that a lot. So yeah, after that we've got the Puig, one of the Puig EQ plugins from the Waves collection, and it's use these an awful lot. I think this is modelled on the old Pultec units, and just really nice, sort of quite broad kind of bands that you can play with, so it keeps it simple. But this is just adding a bit of top end to the drums, so you've got a bit of a boost at 8K here. That's all it's doing really, but you can, it's just a really nice EQ. So that's kind of it for the drums. One thing worth mentioning as well is we're sending a bus off the kick. I think it's mainly off the kick actually, and this is going to a bus that's not actually got an output, but we're using it to duck. This is a bit of a technique that's used quite a lot these days in I guess electronic music, but it's basically use the kick to duck certain instruments, especially the bass. So if I can just get it to the bass part. So on here, there's a side chain, which the kick drum's triggering. And the great thing about I think this is the C6 sidechain from Waves, is that you can specify bands that it actually zones in on. So with the bass, the kick's actually ducking quite a lot out of the subs, the low subs, but it's quite quick. So you get the attack of the kick. The kick is kind of like the driving, kind of punching note. There's a little bit going on in the low mids as well, but it's quite quick. So as long as you're quite subtle with it, you won't notice it. But it just makes room for the kick and makes the kick a bit punchier. And it's quite useful for, if you've got pad sounds as well, like a long pad sounds. I mean, you can really make that effect quite noticeable. Lots of people used it, as a kind of almost like a rhythmic thing. So it can be used as little or as much as possible. We tend to just use it quite subtly for the bass. So that's mainly the drums. I'll have a look at there's some nice little percussion tracks here. So all this blue stuff. I think this might be some live stuff. So we do actually record. We love getting the mics, getting around the mic, and we've got a box of percussion just behind you, which we often, just playing around with stuff, doing live takes and stuff. So I think this has got a little bit of that going on, which. Sounds quite sampley actually. I might have just been what else have we got here? This is I'll take all that back. This is all this is all samples, but we honestly do live percussion recording. So these are just samples from the Contact player, which have been recorded in. Really simple stuff really, but it just adds a little bit of colour. I think there's an extra clap as well. Let's just see what's going on with that. Okay. It's just a little double clap that's been panned over to the right, just for a little bit of kind of stereo-ness. And this, what's this Nord clap thing? Okay, So I think that's on the actual kick drum. And then we got here analog cowbell. So, oh, this is a nice little sound. Yeah, I think this was off the Nord actually, the Nord 2 lead, which has got some really nice percussion banks, which you can really sort of manipulate with the filters and the envelopes as well. So you can get some really nice movement. And it's a simple sound, but it actually adds a lot of character to this track. It's quite an important feature. And it sort of comes in every now and again just to elevate sections, which kind of contrasts with the vocal. So it usually comes in between vocal chunks, which kind of gives the track a bit of colour and differentiates sections a little bit. So get onto the bass track. It's a pretty simple part, this, but this is from the Juno, I think, yeah. So just sort of a sub bass. And it was one of the first elements, I think, when we first wrote the track, which kind of gave the body of the track, which, you know, usually, you know, the bass is, but I think for a long time the track was quite stripped back and it was just bass and drums. So it's simple, but it kind of lent a sort of a flavour to the track from the word go, really. So there's not too much going on there. I think we've got a bit of EQ wise, just rolled off a bit of the bottom end, the very bottom end, because this is a sub. It's really subby, this bass sound. So there was a lot of bottom end. And then just there's a little bit of the R bass, just to kind of sort of isolated a particular frequency there that seemed to kind of fit in the track. So moving down into the green area, which is our kind of, like I said, it's this sort of what we colour our sort of vintagey stuff, or kind of real keys. There's a music box sound, which is just a ES24 plugin. Pretty straightforward. A lot of the bottom end rolled off. I don't think there's much going on down there anyway. Like I say, fairly straightforward. And again, it's a little bit like what I was talking about, the analog kind of cowbell sound. It's a sound that comes in between vocal sections. So when the vocals stop, it's a bit of interest. And that's kind of how it's used. In fact, I might as well look at this section actually. So after the first block of vocals, there's this, the music box comes in with this analog sound, this sort of arpeggiator sound. So this is from non-profit Artoria, which is the Artoria Synth collection, which is really, really good. We use it a lot. Yeah, they're pretty. I mean, they do a really good job. They're not going to be exactly the same as the originals, but the sort of the what you get within the package is amazing. And we tend to use them. They're quite difficult to edit unless you've got like the Arturio keyboard, but so we tend to use just the presets and maybe just change the filters and stuff like that, because to actually kind of get really into programming these things, it's quite difficult unless you've actually got to control the keyboard. But on this case, it was just a little bit of a filter curve on there, just programmed in. Which, again, for this section, this is a little break section between the first verse and the second verse, so it just kind of leads into the next vocal piece. Let's having a look at what's this Juno part. So yeah, that's just a little kind of ooh sound. There's much more we can say about that, but we've got lots of little kind of cheeky little noises in this track that sort of they don't do much on their own, but they just kind of, they're sort of one-off noises that kind of add a little flavour. Whether it's, you know, it's just some kind of little weird perk noise, or it's, I think that was off the Juno. So just going back to the green vintage stuff, this is a clavy part, which is from one of the Contact players. Get it up. Oops. So it's really nice plug in this. It's fairly straightforward to use, and it's got some nice effects on it, and the filters, and where you can change the pickups and really kind of shape the sound to fit your purposes. I think we've dirtied this up a little bit with the Sound Toys decapitator, which we use quite a lot, which just adds a little bit of dirt and a bit of grit. And there's added a little bit of filter to it off the Filter Freak as well. It's another Sound Toys plugin. We use the Sound Toys a lot. They're amazing. Kind of our go-to plugins for effects, really. But that's just giving it a little bit of movement on the part. It's just like an auto wah. Which is that. So let's move on to the guitars. Nothing too complicated on the guitars. There's two parts. Again, it's kind of, the first part is a little riff really to fill in the interest. It's kind of coming in between two vocal blocks. And this was, I think it was off the telly, this Telecaster. Again, I think we've got Filter Freak doing the wah, because I think it was just played in straight. Which it was. So again, Filter Freak doing a similar thing to the the clavinet, which is just like a little bit of a bandpass kind of boost, using both filters to kind of modulate up and down, and just add that kind of sort of slightly wah effect. It's just to kind of liven the sound up and make it a bit less straight, really. And also, what we got here is Fab Filter. Yeah, the Fab Filter is really good for, I use the Pro C compressor. Use it quite a lot on guitar parts, actually, because it's just really good. The visual display's really nice and quite intuitive to use. But as you can see exactly what it's doing. And for me, I do quite a lot of these kind of picky guitar parts, so I tend to use this quite a lot. If quite a fast attack, and so, yeah. So the fact that slightly longer release, and yeah, it just kind of helps calm the dynamics down a little bit. So yeah, just one other guitar part, which is the kind of more lively, kind of chic style, I guess you'd call it. So it's pretty straightforward again. It's using the Fab Filter compressor on it. With almost the same settings really as the previous part. It's quite quick, played quite quickly. It wants to be kind of catching those transients and just making sure it's smooth but not overdoing it as well. I've also got an L1 limiter on there just to calm the top. Just catching just the rogue little kind of little spikes there really. It's not really doing anything. It's just adding a little bit more control to the sound. Okay, I've actually used the Fab Filter EQ on this one. I've got kind of no rules as to which EQs I use really. I do tend to use, or we tend to use the Logic channel EQ a lot. I think with the Fab Filter, it's visually nicer to use. It's got a little bit more control over the scale of where you can put things. I think the Logic EQs are kind of work on half dB increments, whereas this is a bit more, you can get sort of, you can actually get into sort of increments of in between centi-dBs, whatever you'd call that, I guess. Just a bit more control, really. And it's got I use the multi-band compressor quite a lot from the Fab Filters, especially on the guitar. It just calms down this. It's subtle, but it just catches the kind of that quite sort of harsh top end. It's a part that comes in between two vocal chunks, so it's up until this point of the track, there's quite a lot of space rhythmically. So when this part comes in, as obviously it's quite a rhythmically rich, and also it's a chord change, so it's quite a big change to the track. I think that's a lot to do with how this track works. Is just having different textures and different sections. It's not a building sort of like dance track. It's quite sort of almost blocky in its arrangement. So moving on to some of the more analog parts, and quite a few of them were done on the 106, and this is one of the main parts, which is a sort of chord keyboard line, which I'll show you now. So yeah, this is like I say, we use the Juno 106 a lot. It's a brilliant synth. It's probably one of my favourites out of the whole setup. It's so easy to use, very straightforward, intuitive. So for this particular sound, it was using the pulse waveform, and it's just dead simple. Just the filter's really filtered down, so there's not much. It's right down with a really quite short envelope on it, a short decay. Short decay, just giving it just a little bit of stabby kind of punch. A little bit of resonance, but not too much. And we're using the chorus off the Juno as well, which is a really great sounding chorus. It's very hard to kind of get one that sounds as good as the actual chorus on the Juno. So that just really changes the sound from being quite straight to filling it out. I think also the bass, the sub bass, was from this as well, and there's another top end sound which I'll get to in a minute, but that's the kind of the main riff from the Juno. So yeah, so moving on to some more Juno sounds. There's this kind of top line, very simple, but again, it's simple, but it really adds kind of flavour to the track. It's almost got a bit of a Princey feel to it. Again, using the pulse. I think the pulse waveform has been heavily used in this track. And yeah, I think maybe as well, obviously using the same synth to do the main body of the the bass and the slight bit of keys. The bit of keys I just showed you then kind of helps unify the track and give it a good sound. But it's that particular part comes in the second verse part as well. So it's the track starts really simply, and then these little layers kind of get included, and that was one of the first parts we wrote for this track as well. That's kind of it for the analog side of things. We've got something here which is just a bit of a sound effect. Again, I think it's just some samples from the ES-24, which were just like really low bit rate kind of tones, like 8-bit sort of little samples. Just solo that. So it's just got that kind of crunchy, just going through a delay. It just adds a bit of, well, you're not really hearing it there because the brass comes in, but it's subtle, but it adds a little bit of colour. So yeah, let's move on to the vocals. For the most part, I think what we've basically got 4 tracks of vocals. So there's not a lead vocal as such, it's just been tracked up 4 times. I don't know if we've pushed one up front. So we've got kind of a lead and then 3 double tracks as a kind of a bed underneath. So if I just solo the vocal part.
Have it on my mind for 40 hours. Now I'm here with you.
So that's kind of the bed.
My eyes are feeling warmer and I'm glowing. I'm glowing.
And I mean, they're all the same really. It's not like there was one that was a better quality. We just pushed one up just to kind of give the vocal part a bit of focus really. So the other tracks, so that's the main one. The other ones are kind of panned left and right, and then we've got one sat in the middle, just underneath the main one. But it just adds a real nice, and we don't always double track stuff up actually, it's pretty rare, especially in verses, but on this occasion, because the track's so empty musically at this point,
Have it on my
let's just get in the solo.
Have it on my mind for 40 hours. Now I'm here with you.
There's just plenty of room for it.
My eyes are feeling warmer and I'm glowing. I'm glowing with you.
And again, it's looking at this, the vocals are bust. Well, this particular group of vocals, the verses are bust to one channel. And it's pretty straightforward again. Logic EQ, just taking off some of, you know, any sort of background noise really. We always tend to take quite a large scoop out of the low mids, just to take away some of the kind of boxiness of the vocal. There's a tiny bit of high mids in there, and the rest of it's been done on the Puig EQs, which are just great for top end, have a bit more character than the Logic ones. So again, it's a high frequency, an 8K boost on that one, and then this is a little bit of a boost around 4K there, which is where a lot of the detail of the vocal is. So that's kind of.
Have it on my mind for 40 hours. Now I'm here with you. My eyes are feeling warmer and I'm glowing.
A lot of the top end is mainly coming off those plugins, and then Fab Filter's doing.
Have it on my mind for 40
There's a bit of a
hours.
multi-band on the mids there, just to kind of smooth that out a little bit. So that's kind of it on those vocal parts. And then one of the later sections, which is, it's sort of it's a fairly unconventional song, this, in terms of its layout. It's not kind of verse chorus. It's kind of what we kind of call these as verses. They're sort of like little sections. They're very similar. Then there's this section, which is almost like a bridge passage, and then you have the chorus at the end, which you'd call the chorus. So it's kind of it's just the way it's kind of worked out. So this particular passage here is made up of a high octave and a low octave, I think. Let's have a look. So this is the high one.
I am the size of a mountain. Come with me, come with me.
And then, so yeah, that's just two tracks, left and right. Slightly panned a little bit, just for a bit of width. And then underneath that, should
I
be
am the size of a mountain.
doing the same sort of job.
With me.
Panned a little bit wider. And I think I know we pushed the high one up, I'm not sure. Oh no, it's actually the low one that's being pushed up.
I am the size of a mountain. Come with me, come with me. I am the source of the fountain.
Similar sort of thing to what I called the verses, these sections here. We've bussed them to their own bus. It just makes kind of dealing with sections, especially when you've got tracks of vocals, a lot easier to deal with, because they're all working together, they're all kind of doing the same job. So I like to, although individually they've got a little bit of dynamic sort of treatment, but it's really basic stuff. I use the Arvox a lot. It's a really nice, simple compressor, great for vocals, with a little bit of L1 just to catch the top kind of very quick transients. And that's kind of on all of those tracks, but then they're all bussed, and it's kind of similar to the verses really. It's the Pewig doing quite a lot of work in the sort of very top end at 8K and a bit more on 4K, and a bit of de-essing on this one, because as you can probably hear, it's a little bit more sort of sibilancy.
I am the size of a mountain. Come with me, come with me. I am the source of the fountain.
Lots of S's in this particular section. So this is the main chunk of the vocal, or the big hook. Call it a chorus if you like, but this is it's the title of the track. Step into the light. This is where it kind of gets its big reveal, I guess. And it's made up of what we got here: high, lows. Let's go through each one individually. So they're pairs again. It's a bit like the previous section. It's kind of done in pairs.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion. And sample the fruit, yeah.
That's kind of the main where the melody, where you centre on the melody, I guess.
Step into the light, babe.
So a little harmony
For me,
part.
there is no religion. A sample of fruits, yeah.
And what's this one?
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion.
That's another harmony. And this one.
Step into the light, babe. For me there
That's
is
sort of
no
a top
religion.
harmony.
A sample of fruit, yeah.
And then I guess this is one that we've pushed up.
Step into the light, babe.
Okay.
For me there is no religion.
So you've got the harmonies and the sort of double tracking forming the bed of the vocals.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion. A sample of fruits, yeah.
Getting a really
For
nice
me,
sort of
there is
ensemble.
only union. Embrace.
And then the lead vocal, which will sit on top.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion. A sample of fruits, yeah. For me there is only union.
And underneath here, I think we re-recorded.
Step into the light, babe.
Yeah, I think these were done on a different mic. I can't remember. The first one was done on a DPA mic. This one I can't quite remember. MD, not entirely sure what that means.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no.
So we just.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion. And
We've kind of got a mixture between these two recordings. So let's see what's doing the most work.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no. Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion. A sample of. Step into the light, babe.
So yeah, I guess the later recordings have just added a bit more. We've used the DPA. The DPA is a really nice bright mic, so we've kind of used that for the sort of the detail and the sort of this kind of sparkle, the top end. This recording is kind of got a bit more body to it and slightly grittier.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion, and sample the fruit, yeah. For me there is
and actually, I think they're just single tracks as well, yeah. Unless they're being bounced down. Yeah. So there's quite a lot going on there, but we don't have a set way approach to sort of vocals. We just kind of, I think at one point we had so much tracked up. We went back, we stripped it right back at one point and just had 3 tracks, and then we were missing the kind of more ensemble thing. So the DPA recordings came back in, and you know, you kind of, as the track evolves, you change your kind of preference to sort of mixes of vocals, but in the end, that's the sort of the balance we've gone for. So that's the main vocal part, and then as a kind of counterpoint, almost, I guess, we've got these little group sort of shouts, which I'll just solo for you now, which kind of just come in. They kind of punctuate little gaps between, or actually accentuate one of the words out of the chorus. So it's a step into the light, yeah. So we've just kind of added some claps, and I think we all at one point got round the mic and kind of all sort of gave it lots of different sort of ways of shouting yeah, and just to add a little bit of colour really. So when you get the full thing, oops, I'll just solo that vocal part.
Step into the light, babe. For me there is no religion, and sample the fruit, yeah. For me there is only union.
It just, it just adds a bit of colour and kind of interest really. The only other thing on the vocals, there was a little vocal delay thing, which may be worth mentioning, which is just comes in, oops, in between these verse chunks. So it's again, it's so just a bit of kind of vocal effects that Danny's added there, with a little bit of delay. In fact, I think the delay was recorded like that. Danny sometimes uses this Helicon Voice Live processing thing, so she can actually play around with her own effects rather than sort of relying on me and Jim to kind of dial it in for her, which is pretty good. So it just leaves the brass section. So the brass section is made up from, we actually had a 3-piece brass section come in. So we had trombone, trumpet and sax, and they covered the main parts. And then we've also got a plug-in brass section, which I think is, it's another ES24 generic kind of brass section, called brass section, funnily enough. So if I can just isolate the brass, I'll play it all together for now. So if I just solo the live stuff. So, sort of processing-wise, there's not an awful lot, nothing majorly sort of special going on there. We've used a little bit of pitch correction on some of the individual ones just to kind of tighten some of the intonation up, I should say. But yeah, I mean, there's a bit of EQing. There's a couple of frequencies that kind of poked out in some of the parts, but generally speaking, it's more about getting the levels between the brass right, rather than kind of trying to radically EQ them. And then the ES24, which is obviously it's just this sort of generic brass section. It just kind of, we wanted a big sort of kind of sledgehammery kind of sound to it. If that's kind of what we were going for. So I think it works. It obviously thickens up the brass sound. It makes it sound like we've got more players in there, and just fills it out really. And I think the mix between the two is really nice. If you take the live stuff out, I mean, that does sound really fake. So adding the, you know, it's not loads. It's just 3 or 4 parts, but it just kind of really brings it to life. And that is pretty much it. So thanks for listening and watching. That's all we've got time for. I hope you've enjoyed our little breakdown of our track. And
it's available on our album, Age of the Ego.
Yeah.
So get stuck in with that.
Hope you enjoy it.